Snow burst up from the valley floor in long, ragged fountains, each one chased by the flat metallic cough of a machine gun. The mountains around them were too bright, a hard, colorless glare that made eyes water behind scratched lenses. A 9-person element lay smashed into a ragged line of rocks in the center of that white bowl. Their dark gear and scattered packs the only broken shapes in an otherwise perfect expanse. Contact right. Contact left. 2 guns. Someone yelled, their voice already frayed. Rounds shrieked over the rocks, smacking into stone and ice hard enough to send shards spinning. Bullets hissed low, snapping so close to the ground that they raised puffs of snow like breath. Petty Officer Santiago clawed his way back toward cover, dragging one useless leg behind him. Blood spread from his thigh into the snow, turning it the color of rust. He caught a rock with his gloved hand, pulled, and slid another half-meter into the shallow shelter where the medic waited. Got you, got you, got you. The medic muttered, more to himself than to Santiago, as he clamped hands over the wound. A new burst raked across their position, slamming into the stone just above their heads and showering both of them in grit. Main net's gone, the radio man shouted from further along the line. He shook the handset like it was misbehaving on purpose. Dead A on primary. Secondary's just noise. I can't raise anybody. Reaper, this is Valkyrie 1. In contact, taking effective fire. Do you copy? The team leader, Graves, tried his own set, then stopped, teeth grinding as static howled into his A. He ripped the headset away for a second, jaw clenched, then forced it back on out of habit more than hope. Above the sound of gunfire, another noise rolled into the valley, a strange, high-pitched whine that threaded through the usual background hiss, rising and falling like an insect in a jar. Jammer, the radio man said, voice suddenly flat. They lit a jammer. A dull thump boomed from somewhere up on the right ridge. A heartbeat later, a mortar round smacked into the ground 30 meters ahead of them, a blossom of white and black that swallowed the world for an instant and then spat fragments and frozen date in every direction. The blast wave punched through the rocks, compressing chests, making lungs stutter. That's bracketing, the medic said without looking up, fingers still jammed hard into Santiago's leg. They are walking it in. The valley was a shallow basin, surrounded by sloping walls of snow and rock. From any other angle, on any other day, it would have been beautiful, ridges rolling like frozen waves, pines dusted in powder, a sky too blue to be real. From the perspective of the small knot of operators pinned in its center, it was geometry. Bad geometry. On the right side of the bowl, a dense tree line ran up the slope, trunks tight and dark. Muzzle flashes winked between them in cruel little bursts, and traces slashed across the open like glowing whips. On the left, a rocky shelf jutted out, dotted with low stone ledges that hid another gun team firing down and across, their arcs overlapping perfectly with those in the trees. The far end of the basin narrowed into a shallow notch, a choke point ideal for mortars. Anyone trying to run that way would find themselves funneled into a strip of ground someone had clearly plotted in advance. A kill box. And the team sat exactly where whoever drew that diagram wanted them. Smoke out. Graves snatched a grenade from his chest rig, tore the pin free, and lobbed it into the open. It bounced twice, rolled, and settled into a small hollow. Nothing happened. No hiss, no bloom of cover. He stayed at it for a heartbeat, not willing to believe. Then he yanked another grenade free and threw that one. It landed nearby and joined the first in doing absolutely nothing. You've got to be kidding me, Graves muttered. Bad lot. All of them. He ducked as another burst carved the air above his head, sparks jumping from the rock. Captain, they're going to get us fixed and then drop the hammer, the radio man said hoarsely. If that bird can't come in. We move when I say, Graves snapped. Until then, stay in cover and keep your heads down. Another mortar round hit, this one behind them, closer, ripping a new crater that sprayed half the position with ice. The calm silence of the valley was gone, replaced by a continuous roar broken only by the empty moments between explosions. Up on the eastern slope, above the range of those mortar arcs and the tangled fields of fire, A single human shape lay almost completely swallowed by the snow. The hide was little more than a shallow pit hacked into the drift and then feathered with chunks of snow and scraped powder until it matched the surrounding surface. The only reason it could have been mistaken for anything but another patch of wind-scoured white was the thin line of a barrel and the faint dark of glass at one end. Chief Petty Officer Harper Cole had been there long enough for the snow to crust on her hood and pack. The world around her was monochrome: white ground, white sky, white wind. The only color was the faint gray smear of the valley below and the subtle green of traces scratching through the air. She watched it all through her scope, breathing in a measured rhythm against the rubber of her stock weld. In through the nose, hold for 2, out through the mouth. Again, again. The voices on her net were ragged, overlapping, broken up by interference. They crawled into one ear and slid out the other. She let them. If she listened too closely, she'd start hearing the words rather than the shapes, and she couldn't afford that. Maine's still dead, no joy on command. Got a man with ephemeral. I need more hands here. I can't. Reaper, say again, you're unreadable. Under all of that, the jammer's whine climbed another notch and then dropped, like someone testing levels. She could almost feel it in her teeth. She shifted the rifle a fraction, following the path of a cable half buried in the snow. It ran from a knot of shapes near the tree line. Crates, a rough table, a man hunched over a box with headphones, to a slim mast further up the ridge, its skeleton wrapped in white netting. The jammer. Next to that knot, parked nose first into a shallow dip, was a technical truck with a heavy gun mounted on the back. The engine was off. The truck didn't need to move. Hey, it was a static gun platform, the barrel pointed right into the valley. Beside it, a fuel drum, dented and scraped, and several crates stamped with markings she recognized as ammunition. A group of fighters sat around them, some smoking, one laughing too hard for someone in a firefight. Another held up a small camera on a stick, panning slowly across the kill zone like a director on a set. On the far ridge, beyond them, Harper picked out the sniper hide, a shallow scrape, a shooter, and a spotter with glass glued to his face, both perfectly placed to see every desperate movement below. Near that, a mortar pit, barrel angled just right, its crew moving like a three-handed clock, one feeding rounds, one mortarman adjusting, one on a radio. Above the mortar, a cornice of snow hung over the edge of the ridge. It was thick, fat with repeated storms, its underside eaten away by wind until it looked like an icy jaw biting out over empty air. Across its face, barely visible even in magnification, ran a thin, straight line. It wasn't natural. Someone had cut into it earlier, weakening it. Her brain noted all of this in parallel while her eyes moved. Range, wind, time between shots, angle of fall, all of it slotted into the quiet map inside her skull. She rolled her cheek slightly, shifting her field of view down to the valley floor. Her teammates were ghosts beneath the rock. She found Graves, the set of his shoulders unmistakable even at distance, the way he kept his head turning, taking responsibility for the whole mess. She found Doc over Santiago, one hand on a tourniquet, the other holding a hemostat like a weapon. She counted helmets. 1, 2, 3. She walked the scope from rock to rock until she reached 8. The 9th was her, up here, detached, the one piece not jammed into the box. 8 lives caught in the geometry below her. 8 lives and however many enemies had set this whole thing up. Her hand moved down, thumb brushing the mag release. She eased the magazine out just enough to see into it. 2 rounds stayed back at her. Every other shot was already somewhere behind her eyes, spent in earlier contacts, on the way in, covering moves that seemed trivial now. 2 left. She slammed the mag back into place, a controlled, gentle push until it clicked. The voices in her ears swirled, a storm of words that meant one thing. They were running out of time. The extraction bird had already warned them about the incoming weather front on ingress. It wouldn't be able to hover in this valley for long without icing up. With comms cut, there was no way to update the pilot on their new, terrible reality. If they weren't moving when that aircraft arrived, it would leave. If it left, The only route home would be on foot through unfriendly mountains while a prepared enemy hunted them. Reaper, if you're up there, you stay up, Graves muttered down below, not knowing his words reached no one. You don't die for us if we're already gone. Harper switched her radio to the short-range internal channel. It was never designed to punch through jamming or reach out to aircraft. It was meant for whisper-level coordination between operators and visual contact. But sometimes, if the terrain was right, if the interference wasn't completely saturating, it could slip around the edges. She pressed the transmit button. Graves, Cole, she said, keeping her voice as flat as her pulse would allow. On my shot, you move. Static boiled back, then cleared just enough. Say again. Graves' voice came through, strained and thin. Cole, that you? Where the hell are you? She opened her mouth to answer, but the jammer surged, the whine in her ear climbing to a painful spike. His words dissolved into a roar of noise. The channel died. She let go of the button. For a moment, the weight of what she was about to do pressed down on her harder than the snow. 2 bullets. A valley full of enemies. No way to explain it to the people whose lives depended on her not screwing this up. Her hand shook, just once, a brief vibration she felt all the way up into her shoulder. The image in the scope trembled with it. She breathed through it. In. Hold. Out. The tremor faded. In the center of her world, she put the crosshair on the fuel drum. Not on the middle, not on the top. On a specific point where the metal was thinnest, near the seam, where a round could punch through and ignite vapor as well as liquid. Behind it, the crates. Inside those, stacked propellant, primers, steel. She noted the wind, left to right, mild but gusting, blowing down the valley. Adjusted half a mil, calculated the holdover for her distance and angle, correcting for the slight damage to her scope she'd already tested earlier. There was math in everything, if you had time to do it. Time was the one thing they didn't have, but she took just enough to do the math anyway. She exhaled, stopping just before her lungs emptied. Her finger took up the slack on the trigger until it rested against the brake. She pressed. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. The bolt moved. The muzzle flash flared against the snow in front of her hide. She rode the recoil, staying behind the glass just enough to track the path of the shot as a distortion in the air, a blur of speed. Sound vanished for a heartbeat. There was just that dark speck moving across the world, dragging all the potential of the next second behind it. Down below, Graves heard the shot as a single, distant crack that cut clean through the chaos of gunfire. For a fraction of a second, everyone on both sides seemed to flinch at the unfamiliar sound. It was different from the heavy chatter of the guns, sharper than the pop of their carbines. Was that us? One of the operators shouted. Don't know. Graves snapped back. Stay down. Harper was already working the bolt. The spent casing flipped out and vanished into the snow. The empty space in her mag felt like a number ticking down somewhere near her spine. She shifted her aim up and right, to the cornice. Through the scope, she could see individual layers in the snow, bands of compressed storm stacked over time. The cut line was clearer now that she knew to look for it, a faint shadow where the structure had been weakened. She guessed where the stress would be greatest. A point not at the very lip, but back, along the line where tension from the overhang collected. She didn't have time to be perfect. She just had to be right enough. The wind had changed slightly. She judged it by the way powder plumed off a nearby rock, by the threads of spindrift dancing in the air. Adjust it again. 1, she whispered, not sure why she said it. 1 more. She squeezed. The second bullet leapt out, racing toward the cornice. In the scope, it was a tiny flicker, then gone. For an instant, nothing happened. Then the snow moved. A tremor ran through the cornice, a shiver like muscle under skin. The line she'd targeted darkened as the fracture spread, racing from point to point faster than the eye could follow. A chunk of snow as big as a truck broke free, then dragged more of itself along with it. The whole overhang collapsed. It fell in slow motion for the first heartbeat, a massive slab detaching from the mountain, hanging in the air like doubt. Then gravity decided it was done waiting, and the snow dropped, shattered, and turned into a roaring tide. It slammed down onto the slope above the mortar pit. exploding in a cloud that swallowed the crew. The weight of it sheared loose more layers lower down, building into a wave of snow and ice that poured over the position, filling it, smothering it, carrying shapes with it that kicked and then vanished. At almost the same time, the first bullet reached the fuel. The round punched into the drum near the seam, ripping metal, sparking. Fuel sprayed out in a high-pressure fan, atomized in the freezing air. For a fraction of a breath, it was just a glittering mist. Then the world near the truck turned orange. The ignition was instant and brutal. Flame climbed the spray, dove into the open drum, and then expanded like a living thing. The blast rolled the truck on its suspension, blew open crate lids, and hurled bodies backward. Wooden boxes of ammunition cooked off an instant later, each cartridge a little scream inside the larger roar. The man with the camera saw nothing but a sudden wall of fire in his lens before it shattered. Fighters who had been laughing a second earlier were simply gone, replaced by fragments and a spreading ring of burning fuel that painted the snow in black and gold. The jam node took the edge of the blast. The man at the box with headphones stumbled as debris smashed into him, tearing away cables. The device that had been flooding the air with that hateful whine flipped onto its side, a plastic housing cracked and smoking. The whine cut off midway. In Harper's ear, the hiss of static collapsed into something almost like silence. Then new voices punched through it, sharp and clean. Reading multiple detonations. Valkyrie, report. Anyone on the ground? Call sign Valkyrie. Say status. The aircraft overhead, Reaper, sounded startled, almost offended that the world had decided to change without its permission. Harper swallowed, thumb already on the transmit. Her own voice, when she heard it bounce back in bone conduction, sounded distant. Reaper, this is Cole, Overwatch position. She paused only long enough to catch a breath. Enemy jammer and mortar position have been hit. Their commands in disarray. My team is still pinned in the valley. You've got a window. Use it. Cole, where the hell are you? The pilot demanded. We lost your locator 20 minutes ago. High on the east ridge, she said. Doesn't matter. Look where the smoke is. Their guns are blind up top. Tell Graves to move now or he's not moving at all. There was a beat of silence. In that tiny gap, she could hear her heart, finally trying to speed up. She forced it back down, the way she had learned to years earlier, lying in a different hide, on a different hill, with a different life in her hands. Valkyrie 1, this is Reaper, the pilot snapped. We've got Overwatch confirming enemy command disrupted. Move. Say again, move toward the extraction ridge now. We are inbound and you've got one shot at this. Down in the valley, Graves lifted his face from the rock, blinking in the sudden clarity of the net. For a second, he thought he'd imagined the voice, that it was some final trick of the brain before the end. Then Reaper repeated himself, more urgent. Graves looked toward the eastern slope. All he could see was a fresh cloud of snow pouring downslope and a column of greasy smoke climbing where the truck had been. Whatever had done that was on his side. On your feet, he roared, turning back to his people. This is it. Santi goes on shoulders, everyone else pushes. You've got rounds, you put them downrange and nowhere else. We sprint for that spur and we do not stop unless we're dead. Move. Bodies surged into motion. The calm, quiet valley of an hour earlier was gone, replaced by a temporary corridor carved out of violence and chaos, a gap that wouldn't stay open long. Later, people would argue over the exact sequence, whether the avalanche or the blast had come first, whether the jammer had been hit directly or taken out by debris, whether the spotter on the far ridge had been buried or had simply cut and run when the mountain moved under him. They would watch grainy drone footage, frame by frame, around a table lit by harsh fluorescent light. They would rewind the moment where a slab of snow bigger than a truck broke loose, where fire blossomed like a second sun against the white. They would count the bodies, trace the paths, assign neat labels to messy seconds. They would see one thing clearly, two muzzle flashes from high on the eastern slope, separated by a breath. 2 shots, 8 enemy fighters confirmed killed outright by blast, burial, or direct impact. Several more wounded or scattered. A jammer destroyed. A mortar pit silenced. A kill box shattered just enough for 8 people in the center of it to claw their way out. On the ridge, Harper watched them go, her cheeks still pressed to the stock, her eyes tracking every stagger step as if she could push them along by sheer will. Her magazine was empty now. Her rifle was just weight in metal and a length of cold barrel. She let herself feel the tremor in her hands then, just a little. Let herself acknowledge the fact that, if either of those rounds had gone even slightly differently, the valley below would be a very quiet, very bloody, very final place. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a memory uncurled. A dry valley instead of a cold one. Heat instead of frost. A man standing in a doorway with a radio in his hand and a bomb under his feet. Her crossbow on his chest. A voice in her ear saying, "Take the shot, Cole. Take it. Take it." She'd waited. Just a second too long. They'd pulled a stretcher out of that one. She'd watched boots bounce slightly as they moved the weight. She'd smelled burnt cloth, burnt earth. Heard a commander say, very softly, "You had the shot." She closed her eyes against the glare of the snow, just for a heartbeat. When she opened them again, the valley was still there. So were the small, moving shapes of the people she refused to lose a second time. Reaper's engines began to echo off the ridges, coming in low, rotors beating the air into submission. Harper shifted her position, belly crawling deeper into the hide as enemy rounds began to pepper the slope where they thought she might be. They didn't know exactly, but they knew enough to hate that patch of snow. Mortars, now unguided, thumped randomly onto the ridge, too late and too wild to do more than tear up empty ground and send fresh avalanches sliding through unoccupied gullies. As the helicopter dropped into view near the extraction ridge, she heard Graves on the net again, breathless but solid. "Reaper, this is Valkyrie," he panted. "We are moving with one urgent surgical and one priority. We're coming in hot. We've got contact trailing. How copy?" "Solid copy, Valkyrie," the pilot replied. "We've got you. We've also got a guardian angel somewhere up there who just made my job a whole lot easier." The pilot didn't need to know her name. Nobody in that cockpit did. As long as the team made it to the bird and out of the valley, that was enough. Harper stayed in her hide until the last shapes cleared the bowl and the helicopter lifted away, rotors dragging snow up into a swirling cloud that briefly erased the whole scene. Only then did she begin to move, inching back along the contour of the ridge, disappearing into the folds of the mountain the way she had arrived. Unseen, unheard, just another ghost in the snow. 12 hours earlier, no one in that briefing room had planned for any of this. They'd stood around a table littered with maps and printouts, coffee cups steaming in their hands. Outside, the sky over the forward airstrip had been the same pale blue it was now, the same cold clarity that made distance hard to judge. The officer in charge had tapped a pointer against a satellite image of the valley, tracing a neat line from the insertion point to a small black scar in the snow. "Crashed surveillance pod," he'd said. "Weather took it down. We need the memory core and the crypto module out of there before someone else finds it. Hike in, secure the crash, recover the package, and get up to the extraction ridge." He tapped the far side of the map, where the contour lines converged into a narrow saddle. "You've got a tight window. Storm front is moving in the afternoon. Bird won't be able to loiter once it starts. So you hit your times and we're all home for dinner." Questions. Someone had made a joke about finally getting a milk run. Someone else had snorted. A few shoulders had loosened. The intel slide behind the officer showed the area marked in pale green, lightly patrolled. Scattered militia. Low risk. Harper had sat at the end of the table, posture straight, hands folded, eyes flicking between the map and the grainy photos. The only woman in the room, the only one not saying anything. "Look at that. They brought the program out to play," one of the guys had muttered under his breath as they filed in, a half smile on his face. "Must be trying to hit their integration numbers." "Hey, be nice," another had replied. "Maybe she's here to handle the PowerPoint." They hadn't been loud. They didn't have to be. She'd heard them anyway. She always did. The officer hadn't reacted. His gaze had passed over her once, unreadable, and then moved on. During the flight in, bodies strapped along the benches had swayed in unison as the helicopter banked over ridge after ridge. Clerical chatter filled the intercom, small bets on how long they'd be out, plans for what to eat once they got back. Harper had sat near the door, harness secure, her rifle tucked between her knees. The wind coming in through the open side was like a physical thing, pressing against her, carrying the smell of snow and jet fuel. She'd stared at the ground scrolling by beneath them. From up there, the tracks were easier to see. Straight lines in the snow when nothing natural made straight lines. A faint path along a high shelf, parallel to the valley they'd be walking. An oddly clean cut in a cornice, exactly the one she'd later use. She'd leaned slightly toward Graves, raising her voice over the engines. "Sir, there's been traffic up high," she'd said. "Tracks along that shelf. Doesn't look like goats." Graves had given it a glance, then shrugged. "Could be locals. Could be our own patrols from last week. Command says this place is quiet. We're going to trust that until it bites us." "Copy." She'd nodded. "Copy. Protocol over intuition. That was the game. You won or lost it by the rules, most days." At the crash site, the pod had been half buried, metal skin torn and blackened. Smoke had long since stopped rising from it. The mission specialist had moved in with practice speed, tools already in hand, muttering under his breath about damaged housings and ejected cartridges. He'd pulled the memory core out like a surgeon extracting an organ, passed it back to a waiting operator, then gone in for the crypto module. When he'd finally coaxed that stubborn bit of hardware free, he'd held it for a second, thumb running over the scratch casing. "This little guy is why we're here," he'd said. "Lose this, and we're deaf in half the region for a few weeks. Lose it to the wrong hands, and we've got bigger problems." Harper had watched him slip it into a padded pouch and then into his pack. Half the world's secrets had just gone from orbit to a rucksack in the snow. Around the crash, she'd found things that hadn't been in the intel slides. A piece of spent brass half frozen into the ice that didn't match any of their calibers. Boot prints pressed into the snow. The tread too uniform, too modern to be the cheap rubber worn by the ragtag militia they'd been briefed on. And some of those prints had come from above, from the high ground overlooking the site. She'd keyed her radio. "Graves, Cole," she'd said. "We've got evidence the crash site's been visited. Unidentified brass, fresh prints, at least one set from higher elevation. This might be more than scavengers." Graves had been shoulder-deep in a discussion with the radio man about extraction timing. He'd looked up, eyes going from her to the pack on the specialist's back and then back to her again. "You seeing actual movement or just sign?" he'd asked. "Sign," she'd answered. "Recent." "Then we're already behind," he'd said. "We tried to chase ghosts up there. We miss our bird. We'll log it when we get back. For now, we move." "Understood." "Understood." On the walkout, the banter had died down. People were a little more focused. She'd kept stealing glances at the ridgeline, at the tracks, at the cornice. It had all looked wrong in a way she couldn't quite articulate. She'd considered pushing harder, insisting. Thought about saying the phrase that would force Graves to at least consider a route change, recommend deviation due to elevated threat indicators. She hadn't. The memory of the last time she'd challenged a plan strongly still sat heavy on her tongue. That time, she delayed a shot waiting for one more piece of confirmation, one more angle. And they'd lost a man under a collapsing roof. You had the shot. She decided she wasn't going to be the person who cried wolf every time something felt off. Not on a mission where Command had already displayed their nervousness about her even being on the team. She'd waited, watched, filed the gully and the shelf away in her head as possible options if things went sideways. Then the drone feed had cut out. Then the first round had hit. Now, in the wake of the two shots she had actually taken, the valley was a different place. And back at the forward base, hours later, the people who'd approved the op stared at images and tried to reconcile what was on the screen with what they'd thought the day would be. Harper sat at one end of the debrief room, hands wrapped around a paper cup gone lukewarm. Her knuckles were scraped and raw. The skin along one side of her face was windburned, a patchwork of red where her mask had chafed. Her eyes were bloodshot not from tears, but from glare and lack of sleep. Across from her, an intelligence officer clicked through footage on a laptop connected to a wall display. Drone video showed the patrol moving across the valley floor as small, dark dots. Then the explosion of impact. Then the frantic scramble into cover. "Hey," the officer said, tapping the screen as the two flashes appeared on the ridge. "This is the moment." Two shots fired from an unplanned overwatch position. And here, he advanced the video a few frames at a time. Is the result. The room watched the cornice fall and the truck blow up yet again, this time in silence. The attacking force wasn't local, another analyst said. Recovered insignia, equipment, training level, all point to a foreign-backed special unit. Their objective was to capture a live Special Operations Patrol, secure the crash pod's crypto module, and film the whole thing. We've already pulled partial footage from a damaged camera, including rehearsed statements they wanted your people to read on tape. She showed stills of printed scripts lying scattered in the snow, words in several languages. Maps we recovered indicate their knowledge of your route was exact, she added. That detail implies extended technical surveillance or an internal leak. We don't have that answer yet. The thought that someone back home might have fed their path to the enemy sat bitter in Harper's mouth. She swallowed it down. That fight was happening far above her pay grade. What we do know, the officer went on, is that without those two shots, this would be a very different conversation. The senior commander in the room, the same one who'd been behind glass the night before while voices argued softly about integration experiments and political pressure, turned his gaze toward Harper. "Chief Cole," he said, "walk me through your decision to leave the patrol and climb above the valley." She did. She explained the tracks she'd seen from the helicopter, the cut cornice, the unaccounted-for brass at the crash, the way the mortar fire and machine guns had bracketed them with impossible speed. She explained her assessment that they were inside a pre-planned kill zone, that the only way to break it was to get above the pattern. She explained the climb, the enemy patrol she'd frozen for as they passed a few meters away, the damaged optic, the recalibration off a distant rock she'd ranged earlier. When she got to the 2 rounds left in her mag, she let the room sit with that for a second. Why the fuel and the cornice instead of continuing to pick off individual gunners? The commander asked. Because I didn't have enough rounds to win that fight one body at a time, she said. I needed to hit the things that mattered most with the shots I had. The environment was something I could bend. The people were too many. He nodded slowly, fingers steepled. Those choices were not in your plan or in your orders. No, sir, she said. They weren't. He held her eyes for a moment longer, then looked down at the table. Well, he said, thank God you made them anyway. When they were released from the room, the hallway outside felt strangely quiet. Fluorescent lights hummed. Someone wheeled a cart of cleaning supplies past. The world was already sliding back toward normal, as if nothing special had happened in that white valley at all. Graves waited by the door, a bandage on his temple where shrapnel had grazed him. He leaned against the wall, arms folded, watching operators file out one by one. When Harper stepped through the doorway, he pushed off and fell in beside her. You know, he said, after a few steps, when they put your name on the roster for this, I got a call. She glanced sideways at him. From who? Doesn't matter, he said. Someone who wanted to make sure I understood certain expectations. About how this was going to go. About your role. About what it would mean if anything went wrong. She could guess the shape of those expectations. She'd met them in a dozen meetings already. And now, she asked. He reached into a pocket and pulled out a small cloth patch, its edges frayed just a little. The team's insignia, worn soft by weather and time. I don't give a damn what they think anymore, he said. We're all alive because you were on that hill. That's the only expectation that matters to me. He held the patch out. She looked at it for a heartbeat that felt longer than it was, then took it. Thanks, she said. He shrugged, suddenly awkward. Don't make a big thing of it, he said. We still expect you at the range like everybody else. He peeled off then, heading down another corridor. Later, in the armory, the rifle looked different than it had that morning. Same rail, same barrel, same stock, but it felt heavier somehow, as if the steel had absorbed the day. Harper sat on a stool with it across her lap, wiping powder residue from the bolt face, cleaning dust from the action. The scope's housing was cracked along one edge where rock had bitten it. The glass inside showed a faint crescent of distortion at the top of the field. She ran a thumb along the crack, feeling how thin the metal was. It wouldn't hold 0 anymore. It had done its job one last time, damaged and stubborn, and now it was done. In the background, a muted television played the early loop of a news broadcast. The headline at the bottom of the screen mentioned an unnamed special operations unit repelling an attack in a remote mountain region. No images, no details, no names. Sources say no coalition personnel were killed, the anchor said, voice neutral. Officials declined to comment on the nature of the operation. No mention of a woman in a hide on a ridge. No mention of 2 shots. That was fine. The people who needed to know knew. The rest of the world could stay happily ignorant. She finished with a rifle, set it gently onto the rack with the others, and turned to the small corkboard by her locker. It was mostly empty. A schedule, a range card, a single worn photo pinned near the top, a dusty hanger, a stretcher being carried, a boot hanging off the edge. The faces were out of frame. She added something new next to it. A small strip of cloth, cut from the corner of a patch she'd been given in a hallway. A reminder not of approval, but of responsibility. The last time she'd frozen, and the time she hadn't. Outside the armory, the night had started to thin. A pale line of light touched the horizon. When she stepped out into the cold, the air hit her like it had on the ridge, cutting straight through layers to settle in her bones. She walked across the packed snow toward the edge of the compound. Beyond the wire, distant peaks rose, silhouetted against the lightening sky. Somewhere behind them lay the valley. By now, the blast craters would be softened, the tracks half-filled. The mountain would be erasing their presence the way the news had. She stopped at the edge of the cleared ground and stood there for a moment, letting her breath fog in front of her. They said you couldn't be here, she murmured, not sure if she was talking to herself or to the image of that photo, the echo of that commander's voice, the memory of every sideways look in every briefing she'd ever sat through. They said you couldn't carry it, couldn't take it. In her mind, she saw the valley again, rocks, snow, fire. She saw 8 shapes hunched behind cover, waiting for death. She saw a crosshair on a fuel drum and on a cut line of snow. The day the valley turned white-hot and loud, nobody had time to think about whether she belonged. They'd only had time to trust the person who was willing to breathe, to think, and to pull the trigger twice when it counted. She turned back toward the hangar, the patch in her pocket and the cold in her lungs. There would be other missions, other valleys, other decisions, other people waiting under somebody else's scope. If anyone upstairs still wanted to argue about whether women could be in units like Hayes, they were free to do it. As far as she was concerned, the only argument that mattered lay buried under a cornice and scattered around a burnt-out truck in a place the news would never name. Up there, in that unmarked bowl of snow and rock, the math had already been done.